The studio lights hummed above, a relentless sun glaring down on the set. The air in Washington, D.C. felt heavy with anticipation, even inside the chilled broadcast room, where a showdown was brewing. It was a classic cable news setup. Two opposing forces, a moderated debate, a nation watching. But this wasn't just another segment. This was a cultural flashpoint, a moment teased on social media as Gen Z fire meets old guard. On the far right of the panel table sat Caroline Levit. At just 27, she was the embodiment of the new political era, polished, direct, and immune to the condescending smirks of men twice her age. Her posture was straight, her voice rehearsed but not nervous. She was focused. She was used to being underestimated, especially by those with polished smirks and legacy seats in Congress. Today, however, felt different. Today, it was personal. Across from her was Congressman Adam Schiff, a figure as calm and coiled as a seasoned fencer before a match. He was a master of his craft, a man who had honed his political instincts over decades. He didn't even look at Caroline, his eyes fixed on the note cards in front of him, a deliberate act of dismissal. The silence between them was not a vacuum. It was a dense, palpable field of ice. The host launched into the topic: political polarization, family values, and the cost of loyalty in today's America. Caroline spoke first, her words sharp, controlled, and laced with conviction. She wove a narrative of conservative values, referencing her upbringing, her husband's quiet work in the private sector, and the kind of faith that was the bedrock of their lives. She spoke with a conviction that came not from a script, but from a genuine, deeply held belief. Then Schiff leaned forward. A smirk, not polished this time, but thin and dipped in sarcasm, touched his lips. "Well, that's touching," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But let's be honest, Caroline, your husband, what was it, tech sales? He's just another trophy on the MAGA mantle. You recite the script, he holds the flag. It's adorable, really." The host blinked. The studio was struck by a silence so complete it was like a dropped mic. Even the producer behind the soundproof glass froze, his hand hovering over a button he was suddenly unsure how to press. Caroline's smile didn't fade. She simply turned her head, her eyes locking on Schiff, not in anger, but with a cold, surgical precision. "You can question my politics all day," she said, her voice cool and steady, "but leave my family out of your rehearsed bitterness. My husband doesn't chase clout or cameras. He builds things quietly. Unlike you." Schiff chuckled under his breath, but the crack in his mask was visible to anyone paying attention. The old game of political jabs had just been turned on its head, and everyone, from the frozen producer to the audience at home, knew they had just witnessed not an end, but a beginning. The fire had only just begun.
The broadcast ended, but the fire had only just begun. The clip of Schiff's comment, "just another trophy on the MAGA mantle," circulated like wildfire. But it wasn't his moment that captivated the nation. It was Caroline's ice-cold comeback that truly hooked him. She had taken a personal insult and turned it into a political statement, a stark demonstration of composure against bitterness. In under 10 minutes, #TrophyHusband trended, but not in Schiff's favor. Caroline glanced at her phone screen under the desk, a tiny window into the maelstrom she had just unleashed. Dozens of texts flooded in, but one stood out, from her husband. A simple, powerful message: "I build, you burn, we balance. Proud of you." Her smile, this time, was real. As she walked calmly through the backstage hallway, her phone buzzed constantly. Texts from campaign managers, GOP strategists, and even 2 liberal journalists who messaged respect. That, she knew, was a line in the sand. Meanwhile, in the green room, Congressman Schiff paced in slow, controlled loops. His mask of indifference had cracked, and the damage was now visible for all to see. Aide after aide tried to spin his words as a playful jab or a poorly delivered metaphor, but the public wasn't buying it. Even left-leaning commentators called it tone-deaf and eerily personal. Schiff had not just attacked her politics, he had attacked her family, the very foundation of her values. Back in her hotel suite, Caroline stood at the window, looking out over the Capitol dome, a silent symbol of the old world she was challenging. Her husband, Jake, sat on the couch behind her, quiet as always. He wasn't the type to post selfies or give interviews. He was a man who built things quietly. That, she realized, was what Schiff didn't understand. Power doesn't always need a podium. "You okay?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. She nodded. "I didn't start this fight." "But you finished it," he replied. Caroline turned, a strategic glint in her eyes. "Not yet." She opened her laptop. In the draft folder, a statement. Not reactive, not emotional. It was strategic, precise. She began to type, then paused, deleting a line she deemed too soft. She needed a message with the force of an oncoming train, not the gentle whisper of an apology. Her new line was a declaration of war on an old idea. If calling my husband a trophy is what counts as leadership in Adam Schiff's world, then it's no wonder his generation clings to power while mine builds something better. She hit save. By midnight, cable news had picked it up. A new battle had begun, and this time, Caroline was 2 steps ahead.
The initial fire had settled into a slow, smoldering burn, a quiet anger in the heart of Washington that Adam Schiff could no longer ignore. At a closed-door strategy meeting with senior Democrats, the gloves came off. "Adam," said Congresswoman Lydia Patel, an influential moderate from Michigan, her voice a sharp blade cutting through the room's tense air. "We're already losing young women voters. You just handed Caroline a platform gift-wrapped in arrogance." Another member added, "She's not just scoring points on the right, she's shifting the middle." Schiff leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, a gesture of a man who suddenly felt the weight of a world he no longer fully understood. He admitted it was a misstep, but still, he blamed her for turning his 10-second jab into a media circus. "No," Patel replied, her voice firm. "You handed her the spotlight, and now she's using it better than we are." The political ground was shifting beneath Schiff's feet, and he was too focused on the old map to notice. Meanwhile, Caroline sat in her congressional communications office, scrolling through a sea of invitations. Speaking engagements, interviews, fundraising dinners, the political world was clamoring for a piece of the new voice. But one email stood out. Subject: Live Forum Proposal, CNN Town Hall, Caroline Levit and Representative Adam Schiff. She read it twice. A live town hall, equal time, real voters in the room. And Schiff had already signed on. Her staff hesitated. "It's risky. He's still an experienced debater. He'll try to bait you." Caroline smiled. "Let him try." She tapped out a reply. Confirmed. Looking forward to it. KL. News broke within the hour. The rematch that could shift 2026 was on. In the days leading up to the debate, the two campaigns operated in different universes. Schiff's team doubled down on policy prep, a mountain of binders and data points piled high. He was told not to get personal, stick to facts, stay above it. They were preparing for a political debate in a traditional arena. Caroline's team, however, practiced control, not aggression. They drilled clarity, grace under fire. They weren't preparing for a debate. They were preparing for a reckoning. 2 nights before the debate, Caroline received a message from someone unexpected, a prominent feminist columnist who rarely praised conservatives. "You're not winning because you're angry. You're winning because you're composed. Don't lose that." It was a profound validation. It wasn't about her politics, but her method. It confirmed what she and Jake had always known. This wasn't just about defending her husband anymore. It was about defining what leadership looked like in a new political era, one that valued quiet strength over loud, performative arrogance. She didn't plan to lose that composure. She couldn't. The whole world was watching. The CNN studio was buzzing with tension even hours before the live broadcast. It wasn't just another panel. It was a spectacle now branded on every screen. Levit versus Schiff. The town hall America can't ignore. Backstage, Caroline stood in front of a vanity mirror, her hands steady as she adjusted her navy blazer. The silver cross on her collar subtly reflected the light, a quiet symbol of the conviction Schiff had dismissed. She wasn't alone. Leaning against the far wall was her husband, Jake, arms crossed, casual in a dark gray button-up. A CNN producer eyed him curiously, a man whose quiet presence was now a political statement in itself. No press badge, no entourage, just presence. "You know you don't have to be here," Caroline said, turning slightly. "I know, but he made it personal, so I'm here, quietly as always." She smiled. That, she knew, was exactly what scared a man like Schiff. On the other side of the studio, Adam Schiff was in prep mode, his aides reminding him of voter data and pivot points. He listened half-heartedly, glancing toward the curtain that separated him from the stage. Something felt off. It wasn't nerves. It was the eerie sensation that he was preparing for a political debate, but she was preparing for a reckoning. At 8:01 p.m., the lights dimmed. The crowd hushed. The camera panned across a live audience of undecided voters. The moderator's voice was clear. Schiff spoke first, measured, practiced, and policy-heavy, with flashes of moral superiority. His language was familiar: accountability, threat to democracy, protecting truth. Then came Caroline, and from the first sentence, she didn't perform, she connected. When someone like Congressman Schiff mocks the quiet strength of a family just because it doesn't fit his narrative of power, she said, her voice clear and calm, what he's really showing is fear. Fear that conviction doesn't need applause to matter. The crowd stirred. Schiff's signature smirk appeared. "Is this a campaign ad or a marriage story?" Caroline didn't blink. "It's called character. You wouldn't recognize it." The audience murmured, some shocked, others nodding. She leaned slightly forward, hands folded. "You question my husband's worth because he doesn't seek the limelight. Let me remind you, America was built by men like him. Quiet men, hard-working men, not ones who chase cameras, but ones who build futures." From backstage, Jake watched in silence and smiled. Schiff tried to pivot, resorting to the old rules. He said, "Leadership means holding truth above tribalism before delivering his fatal blow, and calling out propaganda even when it's dressed in youth, charm, or a well-rehearsed cross around your neck." Gasps echoed. The room stiffened. Caroline didn't flinch. She simply spoke. "Thank you for proving my point, Congressman." The moderator froze. Schiff shifted in his seat. Caroline, now fully in control, scanned the audience as she spoke. "You don't like that I wear a cross. You don't like that I have a husband who works in silence. You call my values propaganda because they don't look like your echo chamber." She looked back at Schiff. "Real leadership isn't about dismissing what you don't understand. It's about defending what others are too afraid to fight for." As the timer blinked midnight, Caroline concluded her final point with a line that would echo across every screen in the nation. "My president hired me for my spine, not my silence." The town hall ended, but the story was just beginning. The real explosion happened online. As Schiff exited into a waiting SUV, urged by his team to stay silent, the headlines were already being written. She hadn't just held her ground, she had reframed the entire debate, leaving him to face a new kind of political firestorm.
The morning's headlines told the full story. On newsstands across the country, newspaper banners read, "Schiff falls flat in town hall face-off," and "Caroline Levit redefines Gen Z conservatism." What should have been a conversation on ideas had turned into a display of generational arrogance, and Schiff had misjudged the room. In his own district, local papers began publishing op-eds criticizing his tone. But for Caroline, this wasn't about ego. It was about acceleration. Her team was fielding calls for major donors and a former RNC chair who declared, "This moment, what you just pulled off, was national." This wasn't a win, it was a blueprint. Meanwhile, Adam Schiff avoided cameras. The DNC had quietly uninvited him from a fundraiser after donors expressed concern, with one emailing, "We don't fund bullies who lose on live TV." His approval rating dipped for the first time in 5 years. Behind closed doors, Schiff finally met with a crisis manager who delivered a blunt assessment. "You didn't just lose an argument, you lost the narrative." She advised him not to talk louder, but to listen for once. To whom? Schiff scoffed. To the people who chose her over you, she replied, because they're not just her base now. They were your middle. Privately, he rewatched the town hall twice. He fast-forwarded through his own answers, stopping only at the moment Caroline paused, looked him in the eye, and said, "You call my values propaganda because they don't look like your echo chamber." He froze the screen, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he was the smartest person in the room. 3 months later, Caroline stood at the front of a lecture hall at Georgetown University, not as a spokesperson or a political combatant, but as a guest lecturer. The hall was packed with political science majors, some skeptical, all curious. "They called me a mouthpiece, a parrot, a puppet," she began, without notes or a teleprompter. "They laughed at my husband for not chasing spotlights. But what they never understood is that the strongest people don't have to raise their voice. They just don't flinch when others do." A hush settled over the room. She hadn't come to win an argument. She had come to stand her ground, and in doing so, others began to stand with her. The ultimate sign of her victory came not from a poll, but from a quiet ceremony in D.C. where she was appointed to lead a bipartisan task force on civic dialogue in schools. Even some who had once dismissed her now respected her composure and her resilience. Jake sat in the audience, quiet as always. When Caroline stepped up to the podium to accept the role, she simply looked at him, then out at the small crowd and said, "My opponents thought dignity was weakness. But in this city, dignity is rebellion, and I intend to rebel graciously." The room rose not for volume, not for force, but for grace worn like armor. The same kind her husband wore in silence, the same kind Schiff never saw coming.